Welcome back to Theory Underground, everybody. This is a conversation with Benjamin Studebaker, the guy that we've been talking to all summer long about teaching political philosophy and what he will be teaching from political philosophy here at Theory Underground in 2025. Benjamin Studebaker is sort of the left, but also questioning, is the left just a hope industry? Is there a possible way forward that we have not figured out yet? Well, we have to step back. We have to reconsider. We have to think about the situation, especially when it comes to broad or mass structural change, right? So I really enjoy the conversations that I've had with Benjamin, but this one's a special one to me because I think about organizing all the time. I'm always thinking about how do I organize in a way that can better connect with and do stuff with people who aren't super into theory, right? I've done a variety of experiments to that end. Well, there are things in this conversation that really help me think about that sort of, theory church metaphor, right? Because right now at Theory Underground, people who don't have time to do theory full time, who are just listening with their earbuds at work or listening between places when they're driving places or what have you. This is like a sort of place to get their sort of Marxian spiritual nourishment, right? And so we have people who attend the ongoing seminars, whether it be Mikey Downs' seminar or it be mine, the one that I do with Anne. This is a way to get sort of intellectual edification and kind of enrich your life while you're on the go. So if you're interested in all that stuff, stick around until the end of the video and learn more about what we're doing. Go to theoryunderground.com and get involved. Also, there's an upcoming course in October. Chris Catrone of the Platypus Affiliated Society, someone that Benjamin also does stuff with. Chris is teaching Introduction to Marxism. You might find that interesting. And if you're a seminar subscriber at Theory Underground, you'll get that half off. Doesn't get any better than that. So look into it. Sign up today. And with that, let's turn to this conversation with Benjamin Studebaker, who will be sharing the 3 different topics that he's presenting on at TUCon 2024. And welcome to Theory Underground, everybody. Everybody at the live stream side, welcome back. This is an epic marathon live stream on August 14th. It's been a wonderful Wednesday. But when you're listening to this in the future through one of the media arms at Theory Underground, whether it be on podcast, at Spotify, or any other podcast platform, or on YouTube, welcome. Great to have you. Benjamin, how are you doing today?
I am doing just great. It is awesome to be back.
Yeah, great to have you here on our Pirate TV in the makings.
Yeah, man, great to see you. Always great to see you.
Yeah. And so in the last month, you've done 2 lectures at Theory Underground on political philosophy. And those were the first 2 parts of the trilogy, right? The trilogy. And that's been a lot of fun. The part 3 is going to be this Sunday. It's for members only, but it will go public later. And so for those who've been just hanging on to your every word, and there are quite a few, don't worry, it'll be public soon. But also, if you just want to be a part of the back, if you want to have access to all the cool stuff that the people in the background get to have access to, you want to become one of the monthly members. Now, I don't want to beat the PSA thing with the dead horse, like a dead horse or whatever. But look, I do have to say, we have to look out for ourselves and actually make this thing a success. And so how do we do that? We do that by giving you way more value than we get back monetarily. That's how we do it. And you can measure that in quality. And there's a whole paper that someone could write right there. And I think that they probably are for TUCon. But what we're going to be talking about today is TUCon. And Benjamin Studebaker has 3 papers that he's working on, presentations that he's going to give at TUCon, probably a different one on each day, but maybe on one day there'll be one in the morning, one in the much later. We don't want to have you do them all back to back, but maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what the 3 titles are, and then we can kind of go into it.
Yeah, so the first one is a riff on, or maybe an expansion of a talk that I did with you guys already. And that is Time Energy Before Descartes in Greek and Chinese Thought. And there, I'm going to kind of I got the idea for this listening to you talk about Heidegger and Heidegger's focus on being and concern about death. And I thought, what would the Greeks and the Chinese have to say about this? How would they respond to Heidegger? And I thought, well, what they would say is that life isn't really about death or about being. It's about love, and it's about something beyond being, something that's not reducible to our individual possibilities as embodied beings.
Mm-hmm.
That was where that one kind of got started, and it's grown a bit. It starts with Plato and it moves through Aristotle, and then it flips over and goes into Confucian thought. We do a little bit of Confucius and then a little bit of Wang Yang. I'm really looking forward to writing that up a little bit more comprehensively than the version I already did. But I think that one is a lot of fun because I already have a lot of that already mapped out. Then I'm going to do one about monasteries, and I've been wanting to do this for a while because there's this stereotype of monasteries as this like parasitic entity that just feasts on the wealth of the peasant communities. And it comes from a kind of, I think, maybe influenced by Protestantism, negative stereotype of monasteries, a kind of late medieval and modern view of what they are, that I think, just doesn't show awareness of the full history of the institution, how it came into being, why people wanted to be part of it, why did they want to make these things in the first place, what was it about them that was interesting. Like a lot of Byzantine political theorists, philosophers, members of court spent time in monasteries. To them, it wasn't an alternative to active life, an alternative to participating in politics. It was part of it. It was part of doing that, was spending time in monasteries. And before the universities got invented, a lot of nobles, a lot of elites, they would send their kids to be educated in monasteries. It was a given that you'd spend a little bit of time there. You wouldn't necessarily dedicate your whole life, but you'd spend a chunk of time there to learn certain kinds of things that it was felt you couldn't learn somewhere else. So these institutions were pedagogical. They weren't just places to go and hide, right? But they got going in this very different kind of environment where you didn't have something like the modern university. And they were competing with these old Greek philosophical pagan schools, rhetoric schools where people would go and talk to the master. And so they had this more conversational side to them, this more in-person interactive side. I wrote an article a long time ago called "The Left is Not a Church." This is back in the 10s. And it got a lot of people upset because I was saying, hey, why are we blaming and shaming people like we're judging them as co-religionists in a church when we are trying to get people healthcare, when we're trying to have a strategy for improving people's lives? Why are we fussing about what language they use and who's better and who's worse? That sounds like the kind of behavior we would associate with not every kind of church, but certain kinds of very judgy, insular churches. And as time has gone on, I've thought, there are some aspects of Marxism or leftism that are a bit like religion, but not like that.
Right.
Ultimately, a church is an attempt to take the universal and make it something that you can throw at somebody who works all week long. And so there's an attempt in a church to compress it and shrink it and turn it into something digestible. And in the course of doing that, it becomes something that approaches you in your already individuated position, right? You're spending your whole week in labor. You're spending your whole week with very little extra time and energy. And the church is really a morale booster. It plays this role of almost a kind of spiritual amusement, and there's sats of it that's meant to keep you going. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about the monastery as a kind of alternative way of thinking about what religion can be. And something that, of course, historically, because at the time it was created, it's an ancient institution available only to aristocrats, learned people. It was only available to a small number of people. But what would it mean to make the monastery more universal? And I think it would mean something different from the university as it exists, at least today. So I want to do something kind of like a deep dive on where monasteries come from and what is their role. And, is there anything that does what monasteries did? Or do we kind of need to reinvent that in some way? That's kind of what I want to think about there. And then the third one is the left as a hope industry and Quixotism. So this one is going to be fun because I've done, in my book, The Chronic Crisis of American Democracy, The Way It's Shut, there's a whole section on the left as a hope industry, kind of framed around this tendency on the left for people to say, oh, if something goes wrong and your candidate doesn't win, it's because the system is unfair. It's because it's not democratic enough. The procedures aren't fair enough. Then you get into, well, how do you think that we should go about changing the procedures? Well, they'll go, we need to win elections, and then we'll make constitutional amendments and we'll pass procedural reforms. But wait a minute, I thought the whole reason we had to change the rules is that we don't win the elections.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a loop that we get into where it goes around and around. And I remember going to a talk that Bernie Sanders was at in Indiana. This would have been in, I think, 2021, early in the Biden administration. And he was trying to get people to support the Build Back Better, the human infrastructure bill at that time, before it turned into the Inflation Reduction Act, before it was further watered down. And he was asked by somebody in the audience, a lot of my friends, this person said, are getting kind of depressed. They're kind of down. It doesn't seem like Medicare for all is going to happen. It seems like everything that we tried to do for the last 5-6 years has really not been for very much. What should I say to my friends? This person asked. It wasn't me. It was somebody else in the crowd. Brave young guy to say that to Bernie Sanders in front of all those people. And Bernie says to him that it's okay because we've succeeded in raising consciousness because members of the squad like AOC and Jamal Bowman and so on, and Cori Bush, these people have been elected to office. And that shows that there's been a change in the way people think. So this emphasis on, if you don't accomplish anything, then you say, well, it's okay because we raised consciousness. And then when you point out, well, consciousness isn't enough because there are all these procedural blockages, they go, well, there's never actually an endpoint to this. It just goes around and around and around. So I want to talk a little bit about that, not just in terms of the small picture, what's wrong with the millennial left stuff, but also this Quixotism thing is kind of a big picture version of it. I think there have been different versions of this kind of cope going on throughout the history of socialism and of the left. I think Marxism itself was invented to oppose and critique instances of it that already existed in the 19th century. And I think today there are a lot of people who are socialist or Marxist in various different senses who have fallen into versions of this. And there are higher and lower instantiations of this cope. Some of them are quite sophisticated, and then some of them are not. So what I started off with there's a piece that I quote. I don't like to name names because I don't like to pick on people, but there was a writer for Jacobin who had written a set of pieces about how there was this need for campaign finance reform. He had also written other pieces about how countries that have campaign finance reform are still struggling to elect socialists and are still doing austerity and shredding their public services. And that contradiction is really obvious and straightforward. If you're going to say you need this reform, but you're also going to say the reform would not be sufficient, it becomes a big, big cope. But there's also, I think, some people who have kind of fantasies about trying to return to an ideal situation or a set of conditions from the past, often to do with a set of associational forms and maybe a particular year, a revolutionary year that they are particularly fond of, a 1776 or a 1789 or 1848 or 1917. Some moment, some set of circumstances that they think if we could get back to that in some way or return to it in some way, it would create possibility. And I think this often involves a slipperiness about what has changed and what's new now. And what I find often is that when you talk to people about this, they will often be more forthcoming about the obstacles if you start having a more granular discussion about the contemporary moment and what's going on. Like a lot of people who have nostalgia for 19th century associations and free society and stuff like that, they'll readily acknowledge that we don't really seem to have the conditions for that now. And they'll acknowledge, say, Adorno's critique of how all of that had been, by the 30s already totally gutted in various ways, right? But they'll insist that the only way that you can bring about any kind of socialism is to somehow get that back, that it only can happen in one way. And therefore, you have to somehow finesse it so that you end up back in the same kind of situation. Mm-hmm. And there's a rigidity to this, a kind of trying to stay within existing forms that come from the books that many of us have read, instead of doing new theory. And so I kind of want to push on, let's stop being a hope industry. Let's stop being a church. Let's stop doing old theory exclusively, and let's stop blaming and shaming people for falling short of what we're trying to do in various ways. I think that all of these different things have been kicked up in the last 10 years, all these problems with the left. And so I'm hoping to get into some of this stuff at Toucan. I'm really excited to have a good reason to write these things up, all three of these things.
Mm-hmm. And you see TUCon as a good reason for that. Why?
Well, I think, left to my own devices, it tends to be more of a question of what do I know people want from me? Because a lot of the time I'm not sufficiently motivated by myself to make stuff. Like there's stuff I'm interested in and all, but if I don't think that it's going to benefit somebody else in some way, or that somebody wants it, or somebody could use it. Like when I was younger, a lot of the stuff that I would write would come out of being upset with what people were doing and trying in some way to, the term intervention comes to my mind, to make an intervention and go, come on, guys, why are we doing this? This isn't helping. Can't we do something better than this? Come on, don't we see that this isn't going anywhere? It used to be very motivated by this desire to intervene. And these days I find that if I am dealing with people who want particular kinds of things from me, who are interested in particular threads of stuff I've said or talked about somewhere, that just gives me a lot of motivation to make something that I don't necessarily have when I'm just off by myself. And it's one of the benefits of talking to people more, is that you get to see that, some of this stuff, people would like me to say something more about, or they'd like me to write down, or they'd like me to formalize it a little bit. And I get a lot of energy out of that because I really, my work comes from a place of love for other people, and for all of us as humans, it doesn't come from a desire to look good. I kind of, like when I was younger and I was trying to go to Cambridge and do a PhD, there was like a part of me that was like, oh, I want to go to a good school and I want to get a high fancy degree because, I have to show somehow that I can do those things. And then you get to a point where you've gotten enough external validation, you've done enough and people have said enough nice things to you over the years that you don't have this emptiness from not having been affirmed.
Yeah.
It's wonderful once you finally reach that point. For me, teaching really did this for me. Teaching got me to a point where I'm like, okay, I have, every week I see dozens of students who are looking to get help from me. And they are certainly not looking for me to tell them how great I am or show them how smart I am. They're looking to get help. And that really changed my perspective and changed what I saw as, what am I here for? Am I here to show people I'm the smartest kid in the class, or am I here to actually do something that benefits the people in front of me who are looking to me for something in particular that I can, if I can find out what that is and bring it out and, put energy in it, something cool can happen? Or am I just going to focus on myself and, what's possible for me and what can I become? And, I don't really care that much about me in all of those senses. I just find that it's not enough. It doesn't actually do anything for me. And I used to get depressed back when I was trying to be, the person who goes to the best school and gets the fanciest degree. I wasn't happy doing that. It wasn't like, oh, I enjoy competing with other academics for status. It's not fun. And you get into these conversations, and I've been in so many of them over the years with people at fancy universities, where people just start immediately talking about what they're doing and where they're submitting stuff. And there's an undertone of who's keeping up with whom and who's doing what. It's just no fun. No. And it's not what we're really there for. It doesn't really trigger what you love about the subject. And gradually over time, if you just get caught in that, it just kills the enthusiasm. It just kills it so completely and totally.
Absolutely. I'm glad I asked you that question. I didn't expect you to go in that direction, but it makes a lot of sense. It works with a lot of things that you've already said on this channel publicly and also during seminar. And I wanted to just make a quick connection before kind of turning this over to Nance. I don't know that Nance already knew about those three topics, much less that you're doing three. I don't know that Nance already knew that. So I'm going to want him to say some, reflect on it or whatever, react. But I wanted to tie this into the Levinas course really quick, just to say that like Levinas is sort of like this 20th century, you know, working within the phenomenological epoche or imminent critique of that, you know, working within the bounds that established through the critique of pure reason and whatnot. Nonetheless, like getting us to this thing he calls metaphysical desire. And I think that metaphysical desire is just love. I think it's love in the way that you're talking about it. And basically now I'm like, oh, I want to like basically go over what you said here. And then just like, how is Levinas already saying this in Totality and Infinity? Because he is. But basically, yeah, we're not satisfied with being. We're not satisfied with base desires or the fulfillment of needs. There's a pure kind of desire. You know, it is very much, it's not Platonic in this sort of vulgar sense, but it is this idea of infinity, of perfection, of something that the other can give us that we can't give ourselves, something that even when we're happy, we still need. And it's not just the objet off for him. It's actually, it's the other, right? It is the other. There's something there. It's like serving the other, welcoming the other, helping the other, or you know, the other is your teacher, but also, I mean, from the teacher's perspective, like people showing up and being serious about it, like it brings out a side of you that you don't have access to on your own, right? And you're getting to the heart of what I take to be the energy source for the life of the mind, for research, scholarship, and teaching. And so I think that's amazing. And I really like it. And of course, you already gave that Time Energy Before Descartes talk, and you'll be going a lot more in depth in these various ways and whatnot. This is the first time with us, I think, that you've really kind of laid out your case, or like where you're coming from with why you were interested in monasteries. And I definitely want to come back to that. But I have a clarifying question for you. And it's one that anybody who doesn't know who Quixote is going to be thinking, obviously. And that is, what is Quixoteism? And I just have to say, I love it because it's such a deeper and more robust sort of analogy than LARPing, which is, I just want to say, you know, people who do Renaissance fair activities, I'm really happy they're getting out there. I'm really glad they're staying fit and, you know, having fun and like probably getting into history and kind of keeping it alive. And so it's like, you know, within the world of political theory, LARPing is it's what you call the people that you think are unserious. And so, but it kind of doesn't go much further than that. It's kind of getting at something. And I feel like Quixoteism is so much more loving in a sort of sense. It's like more empathetic in a sort of way. Why is that true?
Yeah, because Quixote is such a sympathetic character, you know, in the novel, right? Quixote is this guy who, you know, really loves these old stories about romantic knights, chivalric knights. And he looks around at his society and he sees this world of chivalry, these values as having decayed and fallen away. And he wants to somehow bring it back. And so he tries to be the change that he wants to see in the world. He tries to embody it and bring it back. But there's something kind of mad about trying to live a set of values, a set of norms, a culture that you no longer have the material conditions for, right? The conditions for chivalry no longer exist in terms of the distribution of wealth, power, the institutions in Spain. All of that is gone. So it's not really possible to bring that back socially. So if you try to engage in a type of social behavior that the material conditions no longer support, you could do this, but it appears as a kind of madness, right? And when somebody would question you about it or appeal to you about, you know, why are you doing this? All you can do is quote a bunch of old books. In the case of Quixote, he's quoting these medieval stories about these wonderful, virtuous knights who save maidens. You know, he's got, you know, he's books, and these are stories. They're tales about things that maybe happened. Maybe they've been romanticized a bit and played up and dramatized, right? But there may be a truth to these books. Some of these events may have occurred at one point in time when the conditions supported them. but they've grown in the telling over the years, and he's fantasized over them. So he's layered them in all kinds of glory in his mind. And in the same way, if you try to practice forms of emancipatory politics that were designed for earlier stages of capitalism or different material conditions, you try to use a set of language or a set of terms that were effective in different places, different contexts in the past, you'll often find that you're running into this problem of being Don Quixote, of having this very beautiful, romantic kind of vision. And it might even be the case that what you're talking about was genuinely at one point in time actually emancipatory, and that it was strategic, and that it was smart, and it was the right thing to do. But at the time when it was being formulated, the people who were formulating it were not engaging in Quixotism. They weren't reading old books and getting romantic about them. They were actually looking at the conditions and going, what is possible here and now given what actually exists, right? If you take those same ideas 50, 100, 200 years later, or in a different country, in a different place, different position, different economy, different society, somewhere else in the world, if you do that, you aren't engaged in the same task, in the same kind of project as the person who originally formulated those ideas. That person was in dialogue with reality. You're in dialogue with texts. And there is, I think, in all of the three things that I'm looking to do, there's this emphasis on the limits of texts and textualism, which I think is there. This is a little bit of a tangent, but a kind of wacky idea I've been having lately about. So the difference between the administrator and the intellectual, right, which Adorno emphasizes. And in my talk that I gave with the Confucians, there's this distinction between the sage and the gentleman,
right,
which is, I think, a similar kind of distinction. And I think there is a little rhyming there between Adorno and Wang Yangming. And this is something I've been playing with lately and thinking, could I write something up about this at some point? Maybe, possibly. But basically, this idea that you have kind of a stale didactic kind of thinking, where you memorize a bunch of definitions, and then you learn to classify what you see on the basis of the terms that you've learned. And there are a lot of degrees that we have in contemporary university life that are these kinds of degrees where you go there and they tell you, here are what the words mean. And what you come away from the degree with is an ability to take what you see and label it on the basis of a set of given terms, right? But what the sage does is not label stuff on the basis of given terms. It's think about the possibilities for the terms themselves, right? The different ways in which you can conceptualize the terms. And so what the sage can do is not just label what you see with a given term. The sage can go, how should the terms be understood in this moment so that what is in front of us can be usefully and beneficially interacted with? What kind of language do we need in the first place to make sense of this? And not in a sense of trying to insist upon a set of terms, but in the sense of being able to deal with the possibilities of terms, right? Like a lot of the time when you talk to people who have a kind of didactic administrative notion of political theory, they'll have a notion of, liberty is positive liberty, or liberty is negative liberty. And it just is this one thing. Or maybe it's two things and you have to balance between them, right? But there's only two. And they have fixed definitions. And if you were someone who went to school and you were learned and knowledgeable, you'd know the definitions. And you would know, therefore, how to use them, right? And when you go and you do a degree in social science or philosophy, what you get is a bunch of definitions that you know. And that's the knowledge. The knowledge is the definitions, right? And maybe there's a couple of different definitions for different kind of variants. But in any case, all of the definitions are fixed. And if you get to the point of being an intellectual, the difference between, I think, an intellectual and an administrator, or the difference between an intellectual or a sage and a gentleman or a professional, right, would be actually being able to deal with the fact that no particular language is ever fixed and ever fully grasps the thing. Right? Now, this point is often not grasped by people when they initially encounter it in university, right? Most of the time when people encounter this point, they think it means relativism or some kind of radical postmodern constructivism.
Right.
So they think it means that all of the absolutes are just completely fungible, right? But that's not what it means. What it means is that there are multiple different conceptualizations for each of these abstractions, and always a possibility of new conceptualizations emerging.
Hello, beautiful listener. I see you. Just kidding. I can't. But I have to interrupt this just really quick to make my own advertisement, my very own. The one that says subscribing, liking, commenting, it actually makes a really big difference. So even if you're just on the free side, shout out to you. Thanks for doing it. Make sure to subscribe and all that. Especially people on the podcast, make sure to say something nice in the reviews. It actually really helps. And I need reviews on every platform, all right? Because I just hate to say it, it matters, you know? I try not to chase the almighty algorithm, but also I don't want to have all of this beautiful content go to waste. And so I'm trying to walk a fine line between quality and quantity. And I come out way heavier on the side of quality, as you can obviously see we do here. But come on, let's push that subscribe button, you know? Let's smash that like button, you know? Like teach the algorithm what you actually care about. All right? And then maybe it'll show it to other people. That's great. All right, let's get back to it.
But that's not what it means. What it means is that there are multiple different conceptualizations for each of these abstractions, and always a possibility of new conceptualizations emerging in response to new situations. So the abstraction doesn't have any essential meaning in that it's not limited to one conceptualization. However, the abstraction is important across historical time, and so it's important in a perennial way. It needs to constantly be rethought and relitigated in different contexts and different situations, but it's always important, right? So something like liberty is an abstraction which has been important across a huge amount of time. It's not a term that just came into, one meaning in modernity that we acquired because we became enlightened and suddenly we had the correct definition where previously we didn't understand it. What happened is that you had this abstraction. It was understood in different ways. And as historical time moves on, different ways of understanding it develop and evolve. And we're always in this process of arguing what ways of understanding it are useful now, what ways are not as useful. And if you're caught in too many debates about how to understand it, then you might get to a point where it's hard to actually use it at all. And that might make you think, okay, right now, because of the degree to which we disagree about liberty, maybe we should talk about something else to get at the thing that we might have gotten to with liberty. Because ultimately, all liberty is itself is an abstraction for getting at the absolute. It's some face or some aspect of the absolute that you're gesturing at. And if it's not clear when you use the word what part of it you're gesturing at, and you're not able to get clarity about that, maybe it's not the right word to use in that situation. And if you're really, the sage, if you're really the philosopher, you don't get hung up on, I have to use this word, because the definition of it is that it's good. And if I were to not use it, then I would be rejecting something that is definitionally valuable. You go, okay, I'm trying to help people to have time and energy so that they're able to to grow spiritually, intellectually. What does that actually require in my situation? It's not about words. It's not about the text.
Thank you. No, that was really good. I want to clip it and just transcribe it and put it straight into theorizing the underground, because you're saying a lot of stuff that I was sitting there going, oh, I have to write a paper about this, and I wasn't sure how to say it, and you just nailed it. And so thank you. But what you were just talking about is what Matthew Stanley was talking about when he was saying the school brain, right? Like he was getting at this sort of like no truth, but the kind that is discovered and verified under the person who gave it to you, and they have the credentials, and you tick the right boxes enough times in the right way that they were like, oh yes, you understand my definitions. Like, so I love that has come up again naturally here. But Nance, I said I was going to call on you here so that you could kind of touch on the monasteries and Quixotism. What do you want to do? Where do you want to go with this?
I think, first of all, taking it to Levinas. Earlier, Dave and I were talking about how I'm currently reading Levinas, and so I can't see the world in any other way but like tinged by these Levinas tinted lenses. But but I think it's a good thing. And when you're talking about like being full as opposed to having an emptiness that you're trying to fill over, like you're overflowing, and like you're justifying, your actions are justified to real human people as opposed to like the logic of capital. And I love that. Like I think that's a beautiful way to move through the world and like justify yourself, pro-socially, if you will. And then that kind of goes back to, are we here to just kind of enjoy the content, to enjoy the image or even the simulation of like thinking, or do we actually want to do something? Do we actually want to think? So it's like enjoyers opposed to doers, and we always want to, we always aspire to be doers, rather than just enjoyers. So I love it. I'm also really stoked about the idea of the monastery. That's a conversation. I don't know. I think we've been in its vicinity, for a while here at Theory Underground. Like, is it a religion? Is it it's not statecraft? Is it some other type of like what are we even doing? We don't want to do political organizing. We don't just want to do DSA stuff. We don't, what are we doing? And taking it to the monastery, I think it's a great metaphor, and I think it will help us resist some of the tendencies, rather than just falling into like, oh, we're here to be the most radical, and we are here to be the most smartest people in the world. And yeah, we read all the books and we know all the words. That's not what we're here to do either. We really are here to do something, once again, pro-social, if you will. And that requires a new framework. That framework currently doesn't exist. And I love it. And I also like the intellectual opposed to the administrator. I think in terms of course, there's knowledge and wisdom. There's also information and there's data. And I think I do tend to more of like a technical thinking. Like I really do enjoy thinking about language and technology and how critical media theory, stuff like that. And everything is turned into data. Everything is like just de-worlded points of info. And even like our knowledge is turned into this like mathematic, like, oh, I'm smart. I know all the things. And so I'm this type of person. But that's all just data. And we really want to get to information and live in the world of information, that it is worlded. It is kind of connected to reality. And it's effective in the world. We can do something. We also don't want to sit back and just be booger eaters. Like we are in the world and we want to stay connected to the world. And I think it takes great effort to maintain your, like, you do always come back to like, no, we're in the world. We have to do something about it. We can't just be smart knowers of things. Like that information has to take us somewhere. And that's difficult. I struggle with it all the time. I really do want to just retreat and live in my books. I guess I want to be Don Quixote sometimes. Like I want to live in the safe world that can't hurt me. So I'm excited, man. I'm super excited.
Yeah, I think we're all drawn to that. Yeah, and that's why it has to always be problematized, because it is something that anybody who has an intellectual tendency, it's easier to do that. Thinking about Adorno, Adorno discusses the critique of reification and negative dialectics and its kind of insufficiency, right? Of course, you have to do the critique of reification because the administrator who has taken the terms, the definitions for granted that come from class, the first thing that person needs to do to get out of that is to critique the reification, right? So to say, hey, these terms that we're using, they're not natural, they're not inevitable, they're not the only way in which you can understand these things. They are temporary. They've arisen for reasons. These conceptualizations have arisen for particular reasons. And if you change the thing that gives rise to them, if you change the world, then the terms will change and the understandings will change too. But then the trick is to actually do the changing part, right? A lot of people get really satisfied with the critique of reification, and then that's where it stops, right? And so sometimes I'll do a little critique of reification and somebody will say to me, okay, but what do you want to do? I'll go, well, of course, that's a fair point. But we have to start with the critique of reification. You have to start with it. You just can't finish with it. And that becomes the other problem, is if you finish with the critique of reification without ever getting to the point of, okay, how do we actually change the structure that gives rise to the concepts?
I think the critique of reification without action is a big reason why the people who gravitate, at least for a time, towards metamodernism do so, is because if you read, I guess their sort of foundational text, The Listening Society, Hanzi, the pseudonym for these two authors, is he's saying, like, you're probably tired of sitting in literary criticism classes, deconstructing everything, like he's kind of just like taking this, like, hey, you know what, Deleuze and Guattari can say whatever they want. It's not changing anything. All this postmodernism is not getting anyone anywhere. And no, we need to do something. And it's very much like a pro-action, do something. But then, of course, it's, social democracy and stage theory and mushrooms.
Yeah.
Right. And
it's a lot of actionism just regresses in that way back to something that seems easy to do, right? So you can go, okay, reject the critique of reification. We need to do action. And then you can get absorbed in some kind of actionism that is just about whatever's near to hand and immediate and obvious to you. But the things that are near to hand and immediate and obvious to you to do are the things that come out of the existing structure. So in trying to reach for whatever is nearby, you just lapse right back into the reification, right? To really get outside of it would be to change the structure, which would be to do something not obvious. It would be to create something, some new kind of structure, some new kind of form. And I do think that reading old books can be an inspiration point. I'm not opposed to reading the classical texts. I mean, how could I be? I talk about Confucians and Plato, right? So I can't be against reading the texts, but I am against treating them as dogma or as like a Bible in the narrow fundamentalist sense of Bible, not in the broader, more encompassing sense. Mm-hmm. And that's the difficult thing. Most of the time, people who are trying to kind of call you out, wherever it is, whatever you say most recently in this set of things I've been saying, they'll go, oh, that's all you're doing, just that one.
Right.
But the problem with language is that there's always something you've said most recently. You can't say all of it all at once in every moment. You can only emphasize certain aspects of it with the words you happen to choose at any given time. And that's part of the challenge of dialectic. Like there's some thinkers that I love who I'll sometimes find that they're emphasizing part of it when I think that they should be emphasizing a different part of it. And we don't actually have a disagreement. Like they would agree with both parts of it. Our only disagreement is about which part needs to be emphasized right this moment in this situation, which is both a very small disagreement and it's everything. It's a huge disagreement.
This is one of the big themes of Totality and Infinity, actually, is says the saying is always overflowing the said, and the tendency of comprehension, which would be this comprehension for him goes hand in hand with the school brain. It is this need to grasp and to feel like you've got it fully in your grasp, and the point is not like to dispense with facts. He's not a postmodernist in some. He's just not one, and he's not an anti-materialist either. The point is that we've got to like open up a bit and realize that we're trying to get a hold of these things and that we can't actually understand them if we're just comprehending them within our own little interiority, that we actually have to come into sharing this knowledge with others, that it's only through sharing knowledge with others and qualifying it with other people that we're going to be able to get at anything. Of course, this would be objectivity, right? Like this is objectivity, which he's saying is like secondary or downstream from this face-to-face relationship, this responsibility to be accountable to the other, to give an account to the other, that all science and rationality and philosophy and everything, ultimately, including art and expression of all sorts, is some kind of a response to the existence of others, some need to justify one's own freedom, some need to like, I just say it this way. I don't know if I'm full of shit or not. I have to be in communication with other people and try to fail and try to find out the ways that I'm failing with others. Others are, in a sort of sense, they are the access to that getting outside of oneself to whatever extent we're able to. And of course, we can't ever get truly transcendent, but we can work at it. That's what the saying is trying to do. The saying is always trying to work at that. And so all advances come from the saying. Of course, the saying can't just make some radical rupture with the said. That would be incoherent. Nothing would ever get said. There would be no more saying. And so, yeah, I wanted to bring that in. But on this critique of reification and the sage not getting stuck on signifiers, but living in the world amongst other potential sages, but also potential gentlemen, and the fact that in this sort of Confucian sense, and I should say that everybody, when we say sages, we're kind of using this Confucian sense. We're talking about philosophers, kind of like that would be like the philosopher king for Plato, right? The gentleman and the philosopher king are not the same person. The philosopher king is an obsessive who can't not do this kind of thing, and hopefully can become that kind of role, can fulfill that role through a life dedicated to practice and service. And so it's not something that you can just have on your own or that comes about naturally. It actually requires others. It requires time, energy, talent, and tutelage, the three T's, T squared, cubed, T cubed. And but the gentleman issue, I wanted to think about this a little bit with you because we were having this conversation throughout the day, and I think it really came together when we had Solitariat on. How do we organize things where it's not just a bunch of obsessive dude bros, and where we make ourselves very boring to extremists who are just doing either Quixotism or trying to get back at mommy or daddy or whatever? And part of that means like doing stuff where like women will want to be, and I'm not saying women don't want to be at Theory Underground. I'm not saying that at all. We have a lot of women. We've got the best women. In fact, I've got binders of women, No, all across tour, man. We had like really, really cool women showing up. And of course, for every really cool woman, there's like 10 guys who are just kind of like checking it out just to see what's up. And so in terms of quality, we've got probably some kind of parity between men and women, because we cut out the fat there, and you'd be left with some really cool women and some really cool men. And of course, there's nothing wrong with the tourist. There's nothing wrong with the person who's just kind of checking it out. Curiosity is awesome, and people are checking out various things, seeing what they want to get into. I'm not dunking on it. I'm just saying that the kind of women who come to our events aren't just checking it out. Usually they've got stacks of theory books at home, right? Like that's a whole thing that I got to see firsthand. And hold on, Mikey, we'll bring you on in a little bit. But in wrapping that around towards a close here, we've got another 10 minutes. By the way, Mikey, Todd is coming a little bit late. We already talked on the phone. I guess I wanted to set it up for you to be able to address this problem of what we're trying to think through. So the monastery makes me think of something that's predominantly male. It's predominantly obsessive. It's predominantly going hard. And like you said, some people will only do it for a little while. Other people will do it for a long time. Some people their entire lives. But in the church analogy, as opposed to the monastery analogy, you've got someone who who is able to share spiritual nourishment. And of course, Marx is all about spiritual nourishment, as we know from the third kind of alienation that he's talking about in Estranged Labor. And in the Grundrisse, he also says that the worker, the only thing that makes the worker better than a slave in the good times of capitalist society, that worker is able to go to lectures in the evening and tutor his children. And I think that's like one of my favorite parts. Like that thread, which is like so undervalued in Marx, is like one of my favorite things. So yeah, in this church analogy, you've got like the person who's giving the spiritual nourishment. You've got like the deacons, like they go hard, like they are the monastery kind of guys. And maybe they spent some time at a monastery. But then you've got like these rank and file people. Maybe they only go on Sunday. Maybe they go because their family goes. Maybe they go because it's a social occasion. They go to the potlucks, but not the Bible studies. My experience in the last 10 plus years of organizing has been that when you try to bring together, I will just call them normies, and people who care about political theory, for instance, a very natural and obvious schism does emerge. There can be some overlap, but I tried to have a place, it was called the Victory Farm Center for the Humanities. And there was sustainable farming, and there was lectures, and there were book discussion groups, and there were potlucks. And the most of the people who came to the potlucks didn't go to anything else except for the volunteer days for the gardening. And then the intellectuals didn't come to do the gardening. And so it was like this, it's like me trying to hold together these two worlds and just like, and at the time for the first part of it, I was drinking. And so of course, like I was a bit more of a soci and I was a bit more oblivious to what was going on, but I was kind of feeling something's off here. And this bridging is difficult. And so when I'm thinking about like, oh, well, what if we did like what if Theory Underground had different local film club chapters that are mainly doing outreach to just regular people who are into movies and want to talk about them. And then we show up and we don't talk about we don't drop names and concepts and do alienating stuff like that. It's just very like having conversations, and sometimes we have social things. The issue that it would immediately arise, and I already know it would, is that the people, especially Americans, like it's just everyone's got opinions. Opinions are opinions. Oh, the moment you find out someone's an intellectual or they went to college, that kind of undermines something there in some sense. Or it's like, oh yeah, no, it's great. You've got great opinions, man. But like, but there's this kind of like not respecting the research side of things. And so the church has something going for it that Marxists or post-Marxists who are doing this kind of work don't have going for them. And that is 2,000 years of history and institutions. And so when a person's in a church or whatever, like that person just has this respect for the deacons, for the pastor, whatever. And they understand those deacons don't know everything. They're full of shit sometimes. And they understand that pastor, he's got his faults. I'm not saying like the respect would be some kind of like worship. But the point is like this, hey, we're a part of this thing. And there's this other thing going on that I don't really do, but I love it. And I want to see it succeed. I want that from normal people. I want normal people who never are going to need to become philosophers to kind of be like, you guys are doing something cool and we're so happy to be a part of it. And we like to come to the potlucks. So that's basically it. And I'll just give you the closing floor here. You can say your closing remarks. I told Todd it'd be 6 minutes late. So, we've got 5 minutes to close out here. So Nance will still get to say something before you go. All right.
Yeah, lots of things to think about there. So I think historically, the churches were kind of downstream from the monasteries, right? So where did you train priests? Well, you originally trained them in monasteries, largely. So the benefit of the monastery is that the monastery allows you to have that intellectual conversation without this constant need to market it to the outside. So you can actually do the philosophy. The problem that we have is that there is a desire, and it comes from the best possible place, because Marxism, socialism is all about extending this out to as many people as possible and trying to make sure as many people as who can do theory, as who can think about this stuff and participate in it at the highest possible level, as many of them as can do. But there is sometimes a tendency, therefore, to try to do the theory in an environment which is not outfitted really for that and is too much of a compromise. And when you are doing the theory in a compromised position, it infects the theory and causes the theory to become bad. And this causes the intellectual to become increasingly angry and resentful of the people who are mucking up the theory. And it causes the people who are engaging with the theory to be annoyed all the time by the fact that the conversation is too abstract and too far removed from their own interests. And you see this with DSA. DSA is awash in quasi-theoretical administrative language that is neither good theory nor is it good praxis. It's just bad. And it's bad in both directions because it's a bad intermingling of things that should be in their own spaces. They should have a relationship to each other, but they need to occur in different spaces, right? What makes the church functional is that the church is organized by people who think about theurgy. And I always find that when we talk for a while on Theory Underground, I start thinking about Iamblichus, which means I probably should do something more with Iamblichus in relation to this stuff.
Is that a person?
Iamblichus, yes, the Syrian Neoplatonist from the 3rd century.
Oh, yeah.
Iamblichus has this wonderful thought that really the thing that is higher than philosophical virtue is theurgic virtue. And theurgic virtue is being able to concoct an experience, to create an experience that invites a divine presence. So someone who is not as advanced up the ladder of virtues can get something out of it without having to approach it at the same level as the philosopher, right? How do you get someone into this? How do you get someone further along than where they enter if they're not at a point where they can engage in a philosophical conversation? You have to give them some kind of more physical experience. And that's what a lot of the time socialists think that they're doing with brake light events or gardening or different kinds of communal activities. But they're just kind of, taking a shotgun and just firing it in the general direction of diversity of tactics. It's just, well, we should have, like bowling leagues or something. There should be, social interaction. They're not thinking about it as a theurgic ritual that needs to be designed to give people an experience that opens them up to new possibility. So it doesn't change the people who participate in it in the way that it needs to. They're thinking about it too much in terms of, we just need people to not be so atomized and to get out of their basement and to talk to each other and interact. This is not what theurgy is. It's not just about getting people together and having them be friendly. And a lot of churches these days have lost the plot because they've just become about trying to gather people together and get them to come back every week. They're just about, they're social clubs, purely social clubs, and they've lost their connection to the thing that they're supposed to be part of. They're no longer in the tradition anymore. They're just gathering people together who like songs or like music, right? It's not really the same thing. But to do theurgy, I think one of the great insights of Iamblichus is that you've got to get philosophical virtue first. Then you'll be able to figure out how to design and create the rituals. And that means that the person who is the most advanced will not just be able to have the philosophical conversation, but will be able to give the physical experience, to design, construct, and concoct the physical experience, and not just as like a one-off ritual, but to create habits for people,
right,
to be able to structure ordinary daily life in such a way that it brings this out. And you see this in the really advanced monastic traditions in all of the religions. And one of the things I love about this stuff is that it can be reached in so many languages. And you guys have brought up a couple other theorists who use a lot of different terms to reach similar kinds of conclusions. And I think the great thing about this is how there's so many different ways to get at it and access it. But the core thing is that if you really get far along in this, what you gain the ability to do is to see what it is that someone who isn't operating at the philosophical level needs to do to better themselves, and not just so that you can tell them that and scold them about not doing it, but to actually construct physical experiences, physical habits in life. One of the things I used to talk about a lot in politics was the non-reformist reform. right? The reform that is meant to create possibilities for people. And this is a political way of doing theurgy effectively, right? If you think, okay, if people have access to healthcare, they have a house, they aren't worried about these things all the time, they're not scared of losing their house, they're not scared of losing their health insurance, then when they think about stuff, they're not going to be so fear-based in their thinking, and they're going to have a little bit more energy that is a little bit freer, and they're going to be able to do a little bit more because of that. And that has a theurgic effect. It elevates the level at which they're operating. It doesn't give you the revolution in itself. But, I would argue sometimes with people on the left who would go, well, if you give people healthcare, if you give people housing, then you're buying them off and you're going to make them, complicit in capitalism. They're going to be, dependent on the state, for housing or for healthcare. And therefore they're, just going to become, appeased. And there is a danger of that. Certain kinds of reforms, I think, can have that effect, but other kinds of reforms liberate people from fear to some degree and give them an ability to make decisions based on other motivations, which helps them to see that there are other motivations out there apart from competing for money, competing for status, trying to avoid poverty, trying to avoid death. Almost everything people do is some version of that, or a competition for status, which is meant to invert that. Right? Instead of poverty, you compete for money. Instead of not dying, you compete to be the coolest warrior. Right? There's a status competition that is the inverse of the fear, but they're both totally, totally far away from what people should really be making decisions based upon. So what theurgy does, if you do it right, is it creates norms and habits and regular practices, structures that allow people to not think in these broken ways. But when you aren't patient enough to go to the trouble of thinking about how do I actually make a structure that unlocks consciousness for people who don't have access to the things that I've had access to, and you instead yell at them to get on the same page as you and to do theory like you do it and use your terms and use them your way, then you don't get anywhere at all. And at that point, you're engaged in kind of dogmatist, blame and shame, very stupid, low level of consciousness stuff. Actually, the effect of that is to take you totally out of it and to remove you completely from what you were previously doing.
Awesome. Last word here, Nance.
Thank you, Benjamin. Always tons to think about. If we can call back to Catrone earlier, maybe we just need fewer Marxists to have a successful socialist platform.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Thanks.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Žižek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time, where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button, subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, tier 4 is amazing because it gives you tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
And finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff. So big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful patron people, Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god, it's just so awkward. Thank you, patrons. Okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons, thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys, just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers.
You do it. You did so good. Thanks, guys.